Grab your studio kit or learning box and get the following supplies. Find a clean page in your sketchbook that you can use to paint on today. Once you find a clean page, go ahead and remove it from your sketchbook. Starting from the bottom of your paper, fold your paper evenly 5 times. After you've folded 5 times, take your paper one more time and fold it in half, hot dog style. When you open the page, you should end up with 12 different boxes. So that you can see the boxes a little bit better, go over all of your folded lines with a pencil. The first technique that we'll try is called opaque and transparent. To create opaque paint, wipe excess water off of your brush. As you swirl your brush in your paint tray, it should feel like you're wiping your brush through glue. It's almost sticky. When you add it to your paper, you'll notice that the color is dark and you can't see through to the white of the page. Transparent paint is just the opposite. To do this, add more water to your brush than paint and add it to your paper. The dry brush technique is very similar to creating opaque paint. When using the dry brush technique, make sure that there isn't very much excess water on your brush. As you twirl your paintbrush in your paint tray, it should feel like you're wiping your brush through glue. With the dry brush technique, you can see all of the strokes of your paintbrush on your paper. The wet brush technique is very similar to creating transparent paint. When using the wet brush technique, make sure that there is a good amount of water on your paintbrush. When you add your brush to your watercolor tray, the brush should glide easily along the color. After you load your brush with paint, put it back into the paint can and then add it to your paper. The next technique we will try is called wet on wet. To do the wet on wet technique, start by painting your box with only water. Then, using the wet brush technique, add color to your work. Notice how the color disperses in a different way on the paper. To try the glazing technique, you will need to use 2 different colors. Artists use glazing to create new colors from dry paint. To begin, you're going to add 1 transparent layer of paint to your paper. I'm going to use blue. Let this color dry completely on your paper before adding another one. After your paint dries completely, you can add another transparent layer of another color on top. I've done this using red, and as you can see on my paper, I've created a purple color where they intersect. To scumble paint, you can use 2 different colors or the same color. Scumbling is layering paint on top of itself to create a softer effect. I'm going to do green and yellow. I start by quickly adding some green to my page, and then with a semi-opaque layer, I scumble the yellow on top. As you can see, I'm getting a lighter green because I'm layering the yellow into the green. I keep repeating this process until I get a final result that I'm happy with. A gradient is a smooth transition from light to dark. In order to create a gradient with watercolor, we're going to slowly add water to our paint as we go down the box. I begin with a semi-dry brush on my paper. I then add more water, and as you can see, the color gets lighter as we go to the bottom. Sometimes I need to add a little bit more paint to the top in order to make the gradient a little bit smoother. We're going to try splattering our paint in two different ways. To begin, paint one side of your box with a layer of water. Next, load the brush with color. Using only your index finger, splatter the paint onto the paper. You'll notice that the splatter will look different depending on if the paper was wet or if it was dry. When trying out the scratch technique, make sure that you're working quickly. Begin with a semi-opaque layer of a color. Again, make sure that you're working fast to fill the box. Once you've added a layer of paint, then you can use the end of your brush to scratch a design into the paper. To test out the wipe technique, make sure that you have an extra paper towel handy. Begin by adding a semi-opaque layer of paint to your paper. Using your paper towel, wipe away the wet areas of paint. You can continue adding semi-opaque layers and wiping them away. Salt is an additional technique that you can choose to try out. To do the salt technique, add a semi-opaque layer of paint to your paper. Work quickly and add salt on top of the wet paint. Leave the salt to dry completely on your paper. You'll notice that the salt will soak up the water to create an interesting effect on the paper. Cling wrap is another optional technique that you can choose to try today. Begin by adding a semi-opaque layer of paint to your paper. Add the cling wrap on top of very wet paint. It is very important with this technique that you leave the cling wrap to dry on top of the paint. I suggest leaving the cling wrap on the paper overnight. Once your technique page dries completely, make sure that you clip it back inside of your sketchbook. To clean up your area today, start by cleaning out your brush until it runs clear. You may need to go to the sink and use some soap to do this. After you're finished, put all of your supplies back into your studio kit. And of course, don't forget to share your work in our digital classroom.